Hi, I'm Taylor Owen. From the Globe and Mail, this is Machines Like Us.
I wonder if we have a resignation here.
It could be that Sedol has resigned.
Yeah, Lee has. I'm getting word Lee has resigned.
Yes.
So,
This is one of the most famous moments in the history of artificial intelligence. It's 2016, and one of the best Go players in the world, Sedol, has just lost to an AI program called AlphaGo.
big congratulations, I think,
Yes.
to once again to the AlphaGo team with a final result of 4-1.
4 wins for AlphaGo. Yes.
Very impressive.
In the final moments of the game, Sedol doesn't say a word. He just holds his head in his hands.
But it's very clear that Sedol is now in the after game mode, and he's setting the game.
Go is one of the oldest and most complicated games on the planet, and creating an AI that could master Go had long been a goal of AI developers. A couple of years after this match, Sedol retired. He said that losing to an AI felt like his entire world was collapsing. He wasn't alone. For a lot of people, this was the moment where humans had been overtaken by machines. If an AI could master one of the most complicated games in the world, what would it mean for the rest of us? But Frank Lantz saw that game and got excited. Lantz is a game designer, the director of the NYU Game Center, and the author of The Beauty of Games, which came out last year. He spent his career thinking about how technology is changing the nature of games, and what we can learn about ourselves when we sit down to play them. Frank Lantz, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So what was going through your head when you watched AlphaGo beat Sedol back in 2016?
Well, it's fun to be alive during a historical moment. I think that was mostly what I was thinking. It's just interesting and fun to know that a thing is happening that has some kind of meaning in the larger flow of history, and I felt like that's what this was.
What was that meaning to you? What did you think of the meaning there at its core?
Well, Go was sort of the last bastion of traditional human games that AI hadn't demonstrated a superior ability in, and in some ways, people were kind of interpreting this holdout as being something really meaningful, that maybe Go, because it was so complex, was something that couldn't be automated and required a certain kind of perception or intuition or imagination that you couldn't capture in algorithms. And it turned out that was not the case.
What does it tell us about the human mind, or the way we engage with Go, and the way potentially we were able to hold off defeat from AI for longer than other games? Does it say something about us?
I think Go says something about us, that we like it, that we invented it or discovered it and played it for thousands of years and continue to play it and find it, it tickles us in just the right way. Like, it's a kind of, like, that's what game design is. It's finding these problems and finding these interactive experiences, these systems that tickle us, in the right way, that pull us in and kind of make us curious, and then reward our curiosity by giving us like more and more, by revealing more and more interesting questions and problems. And really what Go and chess and League of Legends and, Balatro all have is a relationship to thinking in general, not just a relationship to the human mind and the human brain and the human body, but rather to thinking itself, right? That they have this kind of, they express something about thinking and about problem solving. They're a particular kind of problem solving that is inherently interesting
So you said that Go and chess were a way to think about AI or intelligence, I suppose, before AI existed.
Yes.
Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, my theory is that Go and chess and strategy games especially, but in a way all games, are forms of AI research that existed long before computers. And what could that possibly mean? Well, if you look at them, like what's going on there when people sit down to play a strategy game like chess or Go, they're choosing to engage in a kind of ritualistic problem solving in which we're going to go to the edges of what we are capable of doing in terms of cognitive behavior and problem. We're going to go right to we're going to map out the edge of what we're capable of doing, and we're going to do that by pushing each other. So we have this adversarial relationship, but it's also a collaboration because we're dancing up to the edge of what a mind can do, and that's where we're kind of like setting up camp. And that's where, people like Lee Sedol and Magnus Carlsen, live. They're like rock climbers on the edge of what kinds of problems the human mind can solve in this very particular way, right? That's what chess and Go exist to provide, that kind of activity of exploring that thing. Now, we do it for its own sake. There's no pretense that it is a scientific project, I think, whereas there is a pretense in AI research that we're doing a scientific project. But I think in some ways, the thing we do when we play one of these games, even though it's not capital S science, it shares a lot with that desire to kind of explore and understand. And vice versa, the thing that they're doing, at Anthropic and OpenAI is kind of a weird art project.
I was about to go there. Is that what an LLM is? It's a world that's been created that we then play in.
Yeah, in some ways, games are so deeply intertwined with AI because, like, when Babbage was like making the first kind of proto-computers and Ada Lovelace was thinking about software for the first time, like the very first thing you do when you're in that position is you start thinking about games. I wonder if they could play a game, and it's because in a game you get to trace out step by step the ladder that gets you from simple deterministic material execution of trivial things. Like this is just a rule that you can turn a crank and it goes, and then you trace that up to like the place where at the top you end up with like emotions and poems and paintings and history and and human behavior and all of its complex, nuanced, nebulous reality. And so there is this kind of natural relationship, and in some ways an LLM is a strategy for sorting words in a way that is predictive.
It's a set of rules anyway, right? It's
a set of, it's the result of like a set of rules we have for training a system on data. We understand the rules of training and how to do the training. And then you end up with this system which we don't understand, which is a little bit more of a black box, but is also a set of rules. But it's rules that we didn't make, but it's rules that we generated with this first set of rules of training that we do understand. And as a result, you have this thing which exhibits behavior, and it's behavior that is something akin to thinking or problem solving. But the fact that it is game-like is really interesting to someone like to a game designer, right? That's fascinating that we have these things that are simple rule-based procedures that are producing this very, very complex and hard to predict behavior.
That hard to predict behavior, that's something that people who have played against AlphaGo talked about. They would make moves that no human would ever make, and that those moves could be from another dimension. What do you think we can learn by watching machines play games?
It's really interesting to think about this feeling that expert Go players had watching AlphaGo make moves that they themselves would never have come up with. But it's not that different from what you or I would feel looking at just a slightly better Go player.
Right,
Come up with moves that we couldn't imagine.
Right, like,
so
that
it's
feels
not,
like from another dimension. I can't imagine.
Yeah, so it is from another dimension. It's from someone who isn't terrible at Go. Yeah,
right. Yeah.
And so in a sense, it's just another way of climbing that ladder. We're just, we're using this artificial, we're using this mechanical process, but in a way, there's a continuity there. So in some ways, it's not that like alarming or disturbing. And I do think it's really interesting to look at the way chess and Go have changed in the wake of being dominated by software, which is that, chess in particular has done extremely well. Like you would think, oh, maybe this would be the death knell of chess. Now that we've seen that it's just a mechanical process and you can have a computer that does it better than any human, it's like, no, we've got like...
But it's a lot different now, right? Like it's a different game, ultimately.
It's not that different. I mean, yes, it is different, but it's the main thing about it is that it's thriving. No one really cares about that you can't beat Stockfish or Leela, or that no one's trying to beat the AI anymore, but instead the AI is present as a window into the game that helps us understand what's happening when humans are playing with each other. Like humans are playing against each other, and we use the engines as a way of analyzing that play. So it gives like people like you and I who aren't great at chess a lever or an angle that we can use to understand better what's going on. I don't know if the same thing is happening in Go, because it's really hard to watch Go. There isn't like a clear like place to go and watch tournaments and stuff.
Sedol said that AlphaGo is an entity that couldn't be defeated by a human. Is that true?
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, in a literal sense, you will always be able to develop software that can beat the best human. However, I do think that it's not as simple as it looks.
Yeah, because people are finding new ways of tricking them, right?
Yeah, in the case of Go, there was this really interesting work by Tony Wang and a bunch of other scientists who were developing this idea of adversarial policies that are these tricky strategies that actually wouldn't work against a human, but that work against the very best Go AIs. And they demonstrate that the story is more complicated than we might like.
I mean, it's an interesting window into something, maybe a limit of AI too, right?
It's a certain kind of limit.
Does that vulnerability tell us something about AI?
I think what it tells us is that there are always trade-offs. There isn't something which is a kind of abstract cognitive problem-solving power that is universal and kind of idealized and you could just dial that up. It's interesting that like 7 years after AlphaGo, that the kind of dedicated research of figuring out what was going on in AlphaGo revealed this kind of deep flaw. I think what that shows is that in this case, this is a piece of software that's only trying to do one thing, right? It's just trying to solve for Go, which is this very, very narrow domain. And even in this domain, there is a kind of gap in its capacity. And that I think what it shows maybe is this idea of adversariality might be universal, like a universal trade-off. Like whenever you make software that does a thing, I can always make software that just tricks that software, because all I'm trying to do is foil you. Like you're trying to do a thing in the world. You're trying to like solve Go, or maybe solve the Middle East crisis, or solve global warming, or whatever it is you want your AI to do. All I'm doing is trying to find the gap and there's always a gap.
Before we go too far down that path, which I could actually stay on for a while, but you write about two games passionately in your book, Go and poker. And I want to touch briefly on poker before we move on to sort of other things. But what is it about poker that interests you?
Well, I mean, I'm interested in the same thing that interested John von Neumann when he came up with game theory, mostly as a result of looking at poker. He was like, look, chess isn't interesting. Chess is just a math problem. Like poker is interesting because poker is this back and forth where I'm predicting what decision you're going to make and you're predicting what decision I'm going to make. And that's what makes it interesting. And so game theory kind of emerged out of that and became this paradigm for understanding decision making under conditions of uncertainty in general. And so, yeah, poker is in many ways a harder and more interesting AI problem because it has psychology embedded in it in a way that Go and chess don't. Go and chess reflect the human mind and what we find interesting. But in poker, in order to come up with a good strategy in poker, you need to model your opponent's mind and you need to understand their strategy. And in that way, it serves as a better model for a lot of the situations we find ourselves in life.
And is that in part because up until recently, perhaps we had imperfect information about the game itself and all the choices? And there's that 2015 paper that argues that poker has been effectively solved and that there is actually a statistically correct move, regardless of intent or emotion or so does that take in all of that out of it? And
I mean, poker, like Go, sort of represents this idea that like, oh, there's something like inherently mysterious about this, but but it's not. It really, they're in a way and again, this is sort of like the magical and beautiful, but also frustrating thing about games is that games are always demonstrating that magic is a trick. Do you know what I mean? Because poker, like Go and like chess, is really just a problem. It is like if you zoom in, you see it's really just a matter of like, you're still just like a kind of a branching structure where you can make different decisions and then other decisions that can be made in response to that and that you can plot it out. And yes, and now computers are as good at some types of constrained poker as they are relative to humans as they are in Go and chess. I mean, there's different ways of calling a game solved. Writing software that plays it better than any human is what they're talking about, and that is true. But again, poker is still thriving under these conditions, right? Poker at a high level right now involves a lot of using computers to model the game and to play in a way that's called GTO, game theory optimal. And game theory optimality kind of represents one type of solution to poker because with GTO, you can come up with a strategy that it is guaranteed that there's no strategy that can beat it. And that sounds like that's the end of the story. But if you think about it, it's not quite that simple because in poker, you're not trying to come up with a strategy that no other strategy can beat. You're trying to make as much money as you can. And if you use a GTO strategy against someone who's making a bunch of very simple mistakes, then you won't be getting as much of their money as you could if you adjusted your strategy to take advantage of those mistakes. At which point your own strategy becomes exploitable by some other really smart strategy. But in this case, it would be a better way of getting more of the money from this drunk tourist or whoever, is making these mistakes. So it's like, look, most people would say, look, it's fine. If you could just play GTO optimal, perfect poker, you don't need to worry about that. You'll be making plenty of money. But it's an interesting fact that you actually wouldn't be playing optimal in this other sense, which just means that there's an even higher level problem to solve here, which is knowing what type of situation you're in, like knowing what kind of strategy you're up against, which is, in fact, the heart of poker to begin with.
We've been talking about how technology or automation or data ultimately are changing the way games are played and our experience with them. But you've also written and thought a lot about how they're changing how games are designed. How is that? How is technology and data and the tools we now have, how is that changing how designers think about building these worlds in these games?
I think in order to understand that relationship, we need to step back and look at a thing that's maybe even hard to see, which is the relationship of games to computers in general. We're so much living in the age of the computer game that we think of games. And for many people, you just say games, and they just assume you're talking about video games. But obviously games existed for a long time. That's a really important part of culture before they met computers, helped invent computers, and now have this kind of like deep relationship to computers. And they are in some ways the art form of computers. Software as an art form. That's kind of what video games are, right? So they have this really deep, complicated, hard to understand relationship to computers and software in general. Now that we are in the age of AI and our relationship to computers and software is being transformed by these new systems, these new AI systems, I think that inevitably is going to have a big impact on games. And it has, to the degree that, look, when I sit down to make a prototype, I'm now collaborating with ChatGPT half the time because I don't understand how HTML works. I don't understand how CSS, right? JavaScript. So already just writing software is changing. And then, developing software at the level of that big game companies do. Yeah, AI is influencing every aspect of that. Animation and art generation and marketing and the way mobile games are already just like a branch of kind of finance at this point, just like a weird
Yeah, say more. I think that's fascinating. Say more about that. I mean, these are really almost financial instruments, right?
Yeah, mobile games are just weird, because they're kind of they're almost half the industry right now.
And how are you defining a mobile game?
Just a game you play on your phone, like the games people play on their phones and stuff. And they're not the ones that we pay attention to, we're looking at Uncharted and Half-Life and, these
big sophisticated, smart.
Sophisticated games with people running around with cutscenes and stuff. And yet, these weird kind of arcade and really casino games. It's almost like there's a lot of the dynamics of a casino. And it's kind of gross, to be honest about it, in the same way that casinos are gross. We can sit around talking about the beauty of poker, but we also know that casinos are gross. And mobile games are kind of the same way. They are this pyramid scheme of advertising and it's basically using the same kind of logic of the casino, which gets most of its money from slot machines, that there's a kind of time on device is the thing that's being maximized for. Unlike the video games that we talk about and pay attention to and celebrate, which even though they exist in the world, they're objects that people buy and sell, they are connected to the incentives of making money, but they are also still a hobby and an art form made by people and played by people who love them and are interested in them and are interested in their qualities as experiences, right? And so they have a kind of, that is a kind of ballast that counteracts their being kind of fully absorbed into the mechanics of digital hypercapitalism in a way that most mobile games have not escaped, right? So that's a little side sermon on why mobile games are bad. But listen, I'll happily design one for you if you contract me, and I'll try to make it as good as possible. And there are good ones out there, but it is important to recognize that's a dynamic, and it's a telling dynamic. Because look, what is happening there is also happening in social media, right? The things that we complain about with social media and the things that I complain about as a game designer about mobile games are deeply related.
And they're both driven by, capitalism, ultimately, to your point.
Yeah, and capitalism. And the thing is that it's not a problem of people being greedy. And it's not a problem of people being stupid. And it's not a government problem. And it's not a corporation problem. And it's not a problem with capitalism. It's a problem with computers. It's a software problem, right? It's related to all these other things. But it is at its heart a problem we need to approach with a kind of engineering mindset. But while we're doing that, we need to bring more than just an engineering mindset. We need to bring our values. Like, what is it that makes social media gross? What is it that makes a casino gross? And that's one of the reasons I love games, right? Again, getting back to this idea of what makes a good game. What kind of games do we want to play? Like, these things are just systems. You are just like optimizing for this or that or solving problems, but you're doing it with your friends in a way that gives you meaning and pleasure of a certain kind and is interesting in a certain way and is rewarding. And when it stops being rewarding, you stop doing it and you make changes to the game or you play a different game, right? And that's the attitude we need to bring to these larger problems in the world, these larger problems of systems and automation.
One of the things I want to ask you about is how so much of our lives now are being gamified in a way, and that we're actually, some of these things that we would have thought of as a non-choice are using and drawing on principles of fun and games and gameplay and these kinds of things to keep us engaged in them. And a lot of our physical and virtual worlds are sort of melding in some ways. How do you think about that? The games coming into other spaces, I guess, than ones we intentionally opt into.
Maybe I'm just being optimistic, but I kind of feel like the worries that a lot of people had about gamification are, you don't hear them as much anymore. And you still notice that there are some things that are like heavily gamified, but they seem sort of stupid and pointless and like no one really cares about them. And they're certainly not working on me. Like Duolingo, like every night, I hear the chimes of my wife's Duolingo software trying to get her. But it's like, she cares about learning Spanish. She doesn't give a crap about any of the dumb badges that Duolingo. So I'm sure lots of people are into like the Duolingo streak and stuff. But I think more people are like my wife, who's just like, we're so immune to that garbage now because it's so stupid. Every single thing, you go on Amazon and it's like, oh, I'm earning points to do this or that. You go on Amazon as a seller and you're like, yeah, you're earning points. Your page has now got 5 points because you put your zip code in. It's like, and you've learned to ignore it because it's not really working. It's not working on me. I assume it's not working on you. And therefore, I assume it's kind of just not working that good on anybody.
What about the emergence of virtual worlds? Are those blurring the lines between real life and games?
I do think that there is a kind of spectrum that makes something more or less game-like. And so it's not a hard and fast rule or there's some threshold. But I do think on one end of that is like when the rules are made explicit and they're known and they're written down somewhere and you can look at them and study them and you're entering into a system that's well-defined in that regard in order to explore the consequences and the ramifications of those rules as entertainment, right? As a thing that is in and of itself fun and interesting and meaningful and beautiful and blah, 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 right? I think that is what makes something a game like versus just having rules. Like everything has rules, like there are rules for the farmer's market, but I don't feel like going to the farmer's market is a game-like experience. Now you can make it certainly is on that spectrum and you can make it more game-like. Ooh, how many different kinds of vegetables can we get? But you can treat it like that. But I think it's important to recognize that those are things that you are intentionally doing to make the farmer's market more game-like. And I think these big computer systems we have are more like the farmer's market in that sense, that they're just big and complicated and messy, that even though they're made up of rules, they're not really that game-like. And I think there's just a deep confusion about like the metaverse and you know what I mean, that we're going to live in a virtual world and it's going to have these game-like qualities of being pristine and discrete and deliberate and deterministic. No. All of those qualities are not qualities of software. Those are human qualities that we bring to certain kinds of software in the same way that we bring them to basketball and we bring them to hockey, putting it into terms you can understand. We you know what I mean? When hockey is a way of us like carving out a simple little ritual interaction, and that's what makes it game-like. And we will continue to carve those out in a world made entirely of software. in order for it to be game-like, we have to come at it with the gaming mindset and recognize when we're doing that.
Do you believe that as technology gets better, games get better? Is there any connection there?
Yes, sort of. Like, when technology gets better, do paintings get better? Oh, well, in some ways, yes, obviously. But in other ways, it's like, I don't know, like, painting seemed really, really good, like about 70 years ago, like really important and interesting and beautiful. And now I don't really pay attention to painting, right? Has it gotten better or worse because of technology? You know, do movies get better when technology gets better? They do in a way. Like, I think it's games have this really interesting relationship to technology. Computer games are about technology, right? In a sense, they're like the spirit, the soul of video games is very much wrapped up in their origins as a way of like looking at computers and thinking, what can you do with these things? You know, let's do something fun with this thing. Let's see what it's capable of, and then we discovered it's capable of like conjuring up imaginary worlds that you can explore and creating like these amazing imaginary experiences and blah blah blah. And it's like, wow, this is incredible. And as technology changes, that the things you can do with it change, and therefore you continue to get new kinds of games, and that feels like a certain kind of progress. And so there'll always be this kind of dialectical relationship with technologies. As it continues to evolve, games will be there trying to make something interesting and cool and beautiful out of that capacity and trying to test its limits and understand what it's for. But I don't think there's a simple kind of curve in any art form that as the techniques and technology get better, you know, it's just like a smooth improvement in the quality of the works being made. I think it's much more complicated and turbulent than that.
I'm wondering if games can help us navigate our experiences with technology, in particular thinking about AI. We're heading into such an uncertain time with the technology.
Yeah.
I think that's what fascinates and scares people sometimes about AI, is that it's an uncertainty and we don't know. And is there something about games, the way you describe them and the way you experience them, that can help us navigate that?
I certainly hope so. I would like that to be the case. And I don't see why it wouldn't be the case. I mean, I think games have all along been helping us wrap our heads around computers. Like, what are they? What are they for? How do they work? And so I'm really hopeful that games will be able to do this for AI. Although it's interesting that we haven't seen a lot of games using this new AI in ways like they're using it around the edges. Like I said, they're using it in the marketing department, and they're using it in the animation department, and in software engineering. It's having a big impact. But in game design itself, it seems like a really hard problem, how to take the kind of vaporous and unpredictable kind of psychedelic flavor of these transformer models and large language models and things like that, and translate that into fun, compelling, meaningful gameplay.
Do you have any instinct of why that might be?
I've been working on it myself for quite some time, and I've had some success, some small successes, but I've also encountered a lot of like just surprisingly hard. I think there's something intrinsically fun about the rigidity of low-level rules that exist in Minecraft that is missing from the version of Minecraft that is just this kind of like vaporous transformer model, Gaussian blur of rules that on the one hand, it's like, oh, this is limitless because you can go and do whatever you want. But on the other hand, it's like, oh, maybe it is the limits that make something fun.
And an AI could be, in some meaningful ways, limitless. And if that,
yeah, in a way that is demonstrates that it's maybe not so great to be limitless. You know, maybe limits, there's something nice about them. You know,
yeah. Well, look, I think that's a nice place to close. And thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Really appreciate it.
Machines Like Us is produced by Paradigms in collaboration with the Globe and Mail. The show is produced by Mitchell Stewart. Our associate producer is Sequoia Kim. Our theme song is by Chris Kelly. The executive producer of Paradigms is James Millward. A special thanks to Catherine Gretzinger, Matt Frainer, and the team at the Globe and Mail. If you liked the interview you just heard, please subscribe and leave a comment or a rating. It really does help us get the show to as many people as possible.